Every company in the technology industry, actually, let me rephrase that. Every public company in the technology industry measures its innovation spending the exact same way. R&D as a percentage of revenue. Why? Because Wall Street tracks it, boards benchmark it, CEOs get fired over it. And it tells you almost nothing about whether the spending is working. Bill Hewlett and David Packard knew that. And from the very beginning, they measured something different. Something the rest of the industry had been ignoring now for 70 years. And the proof of it was sitting in a paper that Chuck House pulled out and sent to me after a conversation at the Computer History Museum board meeting. By the end of this episode, you'll understand this metric, why it works, and why the one everyone else uses make it nearly impossible to tell whether your innovation investment is building the future or just burning cash. Here's how I found it. Now, in the last episode, I talked about the argument that I was having with Mark Hurd. The question over, should we cut our R&D as a percentage of revenue to match that of Acer? I knew that Mark was fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't prove it. The only metric on the table was the R&D as a percentage of revenue. But that was what Wall Street expected. It's what shareholders expected. It's what the board expected. But I couldn't argue against it because I didn't have the data. I needed a better metric. So I decided to go back to the future. HP's complete financial records dating back all the way to the 1940s, division by division, R&D project by R&D project, the actual operating data. And I got access to all of it. And in fact, the HP archive team gave me direct access to Bill and Dave's original notebooks. Now, data alone wasn't enough. It was mountains and mountains of data, and you're trying to extract what is the trigger, what is the signal in that data. Now, I was sitting at a computer history board meeting, standing next to Chuck House, and I shared with him the struggle that I was having. Now, give you a little bit of context. Chuck, he spent 29 years at HP. He was the corporate engineering director, and he'd launched dozens of products. He is the recipient from David Packard, the Medal of Defiance. And the Medal of Defiance was given to him because David had actually told him at one point to kill a product line. And Chuck went around that decision, put that product into the catalog, shipped it, and it turned into being a phenomenal success. And later, David gave him this medal. The ceremony that David gave when he gave Chuck the medal was basically along the lines of for going above and beyond the stupidity of management and doing what was right. Now, Chuck and Raymond Price, they put together a book years ago called The HP Phenomenon. I think it's published by Stanford Press. And it's basically the deep dive into the history of the innovation culture and all of the metrics used inside of HP back in the Bill and Dave days that basically put in place the structure to allow HP to be successful. So when I was sitting next to Chuck at the board meeting, he was then currently running MediaX at Stanford. And I shared with him kind of the argument I had with Mark and the search for a better metric, and had a feeling that there was something around gross margin, R&D impacted gross margin, but a feeling isn't an argument. I needed data correlate R&D spend to margin, and that's extraordinarily hard to do when you've got all these different product lines. Chuck sat there, got this little smile on his face and said, I need to send you something. So what did he send me? He sent me a paper for a journal that he and a few of his colleagues had written decades before. And it laid out the connection between research investment and margin, or I should say R&D investment and margin. The correlation was right on the page. And I read it that night. The next morning, I immediately emailed Chuck, and I was just really excited. What they'd written decades ago matched the data. Now, that email exchange with Chuck turned into an invitation. I asked Chuck to come to HP Labs for he and I to have a sit down. So Chuck comes over to HP Labs, Building 3, which at that time, Building 3 was the main lobby coming into HP Labs. And we took a conference room in the main building in the labs. Now, I look back on this and it chuckles a little bit because this conference room that we were meeting in was just down the hall from Bill and Dave's offices. And at HP, they preserve Bill and Dave's office. To this day, you can walk into Bill and Dave's offices, see their desk, see their office just as it was their last day there. Now, as soon as we got into the room, Chuck walked up to the whiteboard and basically started off on the left side. R&D is a percentage of revenue. This is the metric every company reports, the metric Mark used to argue over spending. It tells you how much you're spending, and that's it. And Chuck broke out their analysis on that statistic. It's an input metric pretending to be an output metric. Now, there's two ways you can use to improve that ratio. Spend less on research or sell more of what you've got. Neither is measuring innovation. So you can manipulate R&D as a percentage of revenue by cutting your R&D spend or sell more of what you got, which means you can cut prices and drive your top line revenue. But neither of them has any tie to measuring your innovation. Then Chuck went to the right side on gross margin. It's the distance between cost to make and what customers pay. It's a direct measure of differentiation. Solving a problem nobody else can, customers will pay more. Margin expands. Product looks like everybody else's product. There's no reason to pay more. Customers will shop you, and margin compresses. Now, on the whiteboard, connect the two parts. Chuck drew the line connecting both sides. Research investment flows in. Differentiator products, margin expands. It funds the next round of research. It becomes a virtuous cycle, but only works if you're watching margin. Manage to the spend ratio instead, the cycle breaks. Boardroom conversation becomes about the number, not the outcomes. Now, apply this to Mark's PC margin compression. If you look at the compression within the PC business, laptops, desktops, etc., it was getting crushed. We're down to 3.5%, 4.5%, 5% operating profit. So what's the response that Mark applies? Cut research spending to match. As compression goes down, cut R&D spend. That's exactly backwards of what you should do. Compressing margin is the alarm bell. Fix the pipeline, fix your innovation, do better innovation, do more innovation, not just more to just do more, but do good innovation. Don't defund it. Now, there's different ways to do that. It doesn't always mean building a product that you can charge more. It could also be get really innovative in reducing your costs. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about the HP 200A audio oscillator. So standing at that whiteboard, we got a chance to look at the entire HP history. And the 200A was actually HP's, what I would call, first commercial product, 1939. Now, there was the competitors out there, but they were charging over $200. Keep in mind, we're talking about $1939. Bill and Dave were selling the 200A audio oscillator for $89.40. Right? That's a big drop. But there was an insight, and this was from Bill Hewlett's master's degree project at Stanford. What he figured out is by using a light bulb as a inside the circuit to be self-regulating to smooth the circuit out, it turned out to be a far superior audio oscillator, and it turned out to be much, much, much cheaper. The result was Walt Disney bought 8 of these audio oscillators in order to make the film Fantasia. Now, the founders tracked the gap, cost versus what customers pay. It's that gap, not total revenue, which is what Wall Street looks for, shareholders. It was, how do I look at the cost versus what customers pay, not revenue? That gap is gross margin, and it funded everything after. Had a lower price product, a higher quality product that customers would buy. And it drove that margin is what drove and allowed HP to continue to reinvest back in the day. Now, along this process, David Packard kept doing the analysis, right? Margin was the thing that everybody got beat into their heads in the early days of HP. Now, the question is how do you identify products that are hugely successful? And the way David determined this was what he called the 6-to-1 ratio, 6-to-1. And this was really great products. And in fact, just products that would classify as being, quote, successful in the HP nomenclature was that the profit from that product over a time frame was 6 times the cost of developing it. If it was lower than that, it wasn't successful and it wasn't generating enough. And this is also how David and Bill decided to kill off product lines, right? So profit had to be 6 times the cost of developing that product. All the R&D, all that. You had to return 6 times in profit, not revenue, profit. Now, there were products out there that were just crushing that ratio. High returns on the research dollars, not bigger budgets. Well, now, what did this enable? It enabled self-financing. No debt, no banks in the middle of it, and no Wall Street 90-day pressure. This was back before HP was even public. It was the freedom to invest on a 10-year horizon, only possible with healthy margins. Now, at HP's margins, spending landed at about 8 to 10% of revenue. Now, you might hear 8 to 10% of revenue and think, Phil, you're being hypocritical. You're contradicting yourself. I just spent 10 minutes telling you that R&D as a percentage of revenue is a useless metric. Here's this difference. Bill and Dave didn't start with the percentage and work backwards. They started with margin. They funded the research that kept margins healthy, and the spending that produced happened to land at 8 to 10%. And so that was kind of their double check ratio. The percentage was a byproduct, not the target. The moment you flip that and make the percentage the goal, you've lost the battle. You're game out, fold up your tent, go home. That's the distinction the entire industry has missed. Chuck drew all of this in about 20 minutes on this whiteboard. Decades of institutional knowledge distilled in one diagram. And the thing that hit me the hardest wasn't the analysis. It was the realization that HP had already figured this out. The knowledge was in a paper that had been sitting around for decades, and the company had just forgotten. What was old had become what was new. HP didn't need a breakthrough. It just needed to remember. Now, after the Chuck session, I reached out to Art Fong. I've talked about Art many times. There's actually an interview I did with him that's in the archive. He's HP employee number 9. At one point in the 60s, 27, I always say 30% of HP's revenue, HP total revenue in the 60s came from Art Fong Innovations and Projects. I also talked to John Young. John was the first CEO after the founders, after Bill and Dave retired. He took HP from $1.3 billion in revenue to $16 billion in revenue. And I had the same discussion about R&D as a percentage of revenue, about margin, etc. And they both confirmed. And they shared their own stories of margin priority, the 6-to-1 ratio, discussions with Bill and Dave. And that series of conversations of Chuck, Art, John, capturing that history really drove me to refine the thinking on R&D to margin connection. So what I do next, I backcast some thoughts against the entire HP history, division by division, and is it predictive? Can you use a metric to be predictive? And this is what will allow me to turn insight into something defensible in the boardroom. Now, this is not just an HP problem. Most companies never had the margin insight. They've all started with R&D as a percentage of revenue, because that's what Wall Street asks for, and they've never questioned it. Margin would have caught it. Margin tells truth years before the revenue line does. Because as revenue declines, you can actually lower your prices and keep your top line. You can cut your expenses, cut R&D. So you can make the numbers look good. But the damage at that point, when you see that revenue, gross revenue, take that dip, the damage is done. Because that is the result of decisions made 3, 5, 10 years prior. Margin compression is an early warning sign. Differentiation is fading. Research is not producing. Now, walking out of HP Labs that day after my discussion with Chuck, I thought I had found the answer. Track margin, not spending. Watch the output, not the input. It took me another year to realize that I only really had found half of it. When I started tracing where HP's R&D dollars were actually going, division by division, I found a problem hiding inside 2 letters. The letters were R and D. We say it like it's one thing. That's how we report it in our financial report. It's how Wall Street looks at it. It's how the press views it. But it's not one thing. Research and development are 2 completely different activities with completely different time horizons, different risk profiles, and different impacts on the business. The moment you combine them into a single line item, you can move money from one to the other, and nobody outside the building can tell. That's what we're going to talk about in the next episode. The split nobody sees. But here's a question I have for you. If you found a way to connect R&D spending to actual business outcomes in your company, how do you measure it? How do you do it? What metric are you using with your leadership to make the difference? Drop it in the comments below. I read each and every one of them, and the best answers end up shaping future episodes. Now, if this episode changed how you think about innovation investment, hit the subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Also, hit that like button and hit the bell. And share this with someone in your company who's fighting this fight right now. And they'll thank you for it. Now, 2 ways to keep going between episodes. Studio notes, which are my essays, come out every Monday. You get that over at philmckinney.com or over on Substack. It's where I take apart a real company's innovation decisions using public data. This week, I dig in to PayPal's innovation health. You want to check that out. Studio sessions, what you're watching right now, drops every Wednesday. This is where the decisions happen. The real rooms, the real calls, the real discussions I had, what went right and what went wrong. Show notes and the full analysis are down at philmckinney.com. Now, as I've said many times, the ideas are never the hard part. It never is. Making the call, making the decision, that's hard. So make that call, move forward, bring your ideas, bring your innovations to the marketplace. You will change the world. See you next week. Bye-bye.